Welcome to Babblecom 5.
These are my thoughts on Season 1 of Babylon 5 in an attempt to persuade you that you should actually watch it and not skip it. So let me first address an elephant in the room, which is the simple fact that a lot of people get told not to bother with Season 1 and head straight into the Sheridan years. Whilst I sort of get this, you have to remember that this show is fundamentally built on the basis of a 5-year arc. So you've just missed 20% of the arc by skipping a year. You also miss the onboarding of many significant characters who will recur to varying degrees and a great deal of universe establishment. Arguably, on this basis, you also need the pilot, The Gathering, as well. So my suggestion is that if you haven't watched the first season before, you might stop here and come back when you have, or keep going and see if this piques your interest perhaps. I started putting pithy little reminders of what each episode was about during Season 1 into the descriptions for my synopsis reaction series here, Babblecom 5. So I'll run through them all and then discuss where Season 1 landed us. There may be some spoilers here for other seasons, but I'll try and keep them light. Midnight on the firing line. And so it began. Soul Hunter. An injured alien is brought on board the station, but he is not a welcome guest. Born to the Purple. Love is in the air for Londo, but so is betrayal. Infection. An ancient alien artifact threatens to bring destruction to Babylon 5's inhabitants. The Parliament of Dreams. An old flame docks at the station as dominant belief systems are considered. Mind War. When a rogue telepath decides to see an old friend, the Cyclops aren't far behind. The War Prayer. Tensions rise as non-humans are seriously assaulted, while Londo and Veer are given 2 runaways to deal with. And the Sky Full of Stars. A security officer's gambling habit leads to the abduction and interrogation of Commander Sinclair. Deathwalker. Talia faces an unusual commission, whilst Natoth is presented with an opportunity to fulfill a blood oath, but may have to bide her time. Believers. A boy's life can be saved by a straightforward operation, but Franklin's hands are tied, while Ivanova's desire for action gives her a little too much action. Survivors. Garibaldi has a deeply bad day in the office, with the President about to visit the station. By any means necessary. A contagion strikes, but only the Dockers Guild is affected. Sinclair must resolve the situation while settling a dispute between Londo and Jakar. Signs and Portents, also the name of the season. A new visitor to the station asks most of the ambassadors a question, whilst avoiding one, and things go boom. TKO. A disgraced fighter and a religious figure arrive on board, one to seek help, the other to give it. Grail. Kosh gets hungry, and a divine relic is sought in the heavens. Eyes. A ninja demands attention, while retribution is sought. Legacies. A girl unlocks new abilities while a shocking incident threatens to reignite Earth Minbari tensions. A Voice in the Wilderness, Part 1. Mars is in turmoil whilst the planet closer to home demands attention. A Voice in the Wilderness, Part 2. Things get heavy and Garibaldi struggles to keep his emotions in check. Babylon Squared. Delenn goes on an outing and the past comes back to haunt the last of the Babylon stations. The Quality of Mercy. Lanier goes back to school and a healer seeks redemption. Chrysalis. The end of 2258 brings dark tidings and new beginnings. So the fun really begins in terms of the concept of this series as being unique for its time and being arc-driven, when you realise that the second episode hooks into the final episode, and that throughout the series Delenn was building this random-looking collection of geometric shapes into something, and that she only gets the power source for that something in Babylon Squared. It's a science fiction show that you can actually get your teeth into if you're a reader of long-form science fiction. Sure, there are fist fights, there are space battles, lots of lowbrow fun, but then there's always something underlying it. There's always that sense that these are ingredients in events that are hinted at but not seen directly. Not all the time anyway. I don't really think it's fair to compare seasons because, like any TV show, it had to find its feet and develop its style in its first season, and characters needed to be introduced. So yes, sure, Maybe it's a little slower here, but for the time that this was cutting edge stuff and the tapestry was just being laid down, we were lucky it kept going with all the network shenanigans going on constantly in the background as it was. So I got into the state of the universe a little when I was looking at the first episode of season 2, and it was interesting there to note briefly just how much has been established in season 1. Let's start with Earth, and in the interest of length you'll forgive a degree of brevity. We don't see the Earth of 2258, we just get glimpses of Mars. It is apparent that anti-alien sentiment is rife, and several episodes look at the spillover of that onto Babylon 5. This is understandable, as it's obvious Earth and its colonies were hurt badly during the Earth-Minbari War a decade ago. But a lot of this is just good old-fashioned racism. We also see it the other way in TKO as well, interestingly, where the aliens are racist towards Earthers. We know that Mars has a degree of civil unrest going on that occasionally spills over into violence. Earth has participated in extrasolar system conflicts and has been successful, so has a degree of standing amongst the other races despite being a relative newcomer. This allows it to run Babylon 5 and try and broker a peace, despite trying to put its own house in order back home. We know that things did not end well for the previous Babylon stations, but managed to rescue the staff of Babylon 4 as it shifts through time, events that Sinclair appears tied into in some way. By the end of the season, Earth has a new president in decidedly dubious circumstances, and Garibaldi is comatose. More changes will follow. This is not a show that allowed you to get too comfortable with the status quo, which is a real departure from the reset button style of other shows. On the alien side of things, we have the two major races most obviously in need of reconciliation efforts. The Narn have been taken over by the Centauri in the past, and now seek to pay them back, in spades. And so we have G'Kar and Londo in their glorious, comedic, deadly serious relationship, with G'Kar initially firmly in the ascendance, despite Sinclair's efforts to calm things down. Yet by the end of this season, we sense the shift has occurred, that Londo's wish to see a return to the good old days of Empire may yet come to pass, with the help of mysterious third parties, who are effectively complete unknowns, but speak through a human who's been out on the rim for some time, and he will play an important role in the unfolding of events. This is the beginning of a fascinating relationship between this pair, Londo believing G'Kar is destined to kill him, while G'Kar simply wants to belittle the Centauri at every opportunity. They get some of the best lines, and the exchange whilst waiting for a lift in Signs and Portents is a lovely example, both finally agreeing with each other and ironically finding common ground, whilst the human caught in the middle makes good his escape. If you missed the first season, then you fail to appreciate just how low the Centauri were before Londo's ambition is seized upon by the Shadows. The Minbari are a puzzle for much of the season, because we know they are an old race and are clearly technologically superior to Earth, yet they simply surrender on the verge of complete victory over the Earth Alliance off the back of their war of retribution for the death of their leader Dukat. We haven't yet seen exactly what happened to cause his death, but it will be explored later. What we do see in Season 1 is just the sheer one-sidedness of the war, and so the gradual unravelling of why the Minbari just gave up on it, and what part Sinclair played in that turnaround, is a critical part of the season. That, in turn, feeds into why the Minbari are so angered by Sheridan's appointment at the start of Season 2. If you don't watch Season 1, you miss that whole underlying plot line, despite Linear's rapid explanation of it, and you also miss the references to what's gone before when Sinclair is being referenced in comparison to Sheridan. You also miss the establishment of Kosh's character. Not that you see a lot of the ball on, of course, but again, you see a distinct behavioural shift from him with Sheridan in place as against Sinclair, and yet he was still pivotal in key events in Season 1, and it's established that he is not fond of Londo's new allies, the Shadows. We also see that Delenn has some insight into this relationship and relationship with Kosh, as evidenced by his going to Sinclair to remind him to see her before she went into her chrysalis. I also want to touch on the effects for the show here. You might be looking at them in the 2020s thinking, what the hell? Crucially, at the time, they were actually unheard of in a weekly show. Trek had its sweeping beauty shots of ships and map painting for the backgrounds, but B5 was doing three-dimensional space battles with fighters with no strings attached. The actual quality of the rendering didn't have to be stellar, because Christopher Frankie's soundtrack and the explanation of what was happening was so supportive of it all that I wasn't nitpicking. It allowed them far more imaginative scope in their universe building, and a rapid speed of production, relatively speaking, as against what traditional model work would have allowed for. The Space Dock channel here on YouTube sings the Starfury's praises as a fighter, with good reason. Even NASA noted it was a clever design in its day. These were smart, logical space battles, and referencing pilot deaths really underscored the fact that conflict was very real in Babylon 5. The stakes and the consequences are very real. The music is also terrific, and it's the sort of thing we don't often stop to think about in creative work unless for some reason it's not working. The fact that the music for Babylon 5 was created a continent away from the show itself is just incredible in and of itself, given when the show was being produced. But that it should support the feel of the show so much at the same time just lifts the whole production by that extra degree, and I still listen to it 20 odd years on. I've just moved house, so I've come back to writing this having started in the last one, and I hope it sells season 1 for you without spoiling anything too much. Yes, there are weaker episodes, of course there are, but few first seasons are perfect. And yet you have to appreciate that those aside, there remain those which are integral to the underpinning of the 5-year arc and the establishment of the core characters. And those episodes will still have weight years down the line. That's got to be worth watching for, even if you focus on just those episodes, right? I want to mention here in closing something that you may have found odd moving from season 1 to season 2, and which no one really knew at the time because JMS didn't reveal it until after he passed away. Commander Sinclair gives way to Captain Sheridan very rapidly, with no handover scene between the two in the second season. My understanding is that the B5 crew were very, very tight-knit, even then, and JMS saw that Michael O'Hare was struggling with his mental health and well-being during the course of season 1. JMS had anticipated that actors and actresses sometimes leave shows, and so he built in escape hatches. He sought help for O'Hare, and they agreed that he would see out the first season, then bow out so he could seek treatment, which JMS helped him secure. So that was why Sheridan came into the show so rapidly. It worked out well, of course, and fans of Tron and Scarecrow and Mrs. King were undoubtedly delighted, even if the early adopters were left scratching their heads somewhat. This marks my first in-person video, and I may do a few other specials this way as I work my way through the television films being ones where my normal screenshot approach might be rather unwieldy. I know this is an old series, but comments are appreciated, and I know reaction type videos tend to do better with a face associated with them, so I thought I'd have a crack at it and see how it goes. My editing skills are not massively strong, so right now I'm intending to do single takes with little polish, but if you do prefer a face to a voice, I'll see if I can adapt my approach accordingly. Unfortunately, my new house is going to require some attention in the near term, so I won't put any timescales on my progress in this regard if you don't mind. I will simply try and keep my production rate steady, so you know what to expect. In terms of future plans, you'll have seen that the playlist includes some videos on merchandise and the micro machines, but if you'd be interested in anything in particular, let me know. The movies are certainly on my list to get to, but I'd like to try and slot them in appropriate places. I certainly want to get to The Gathering. I've held off on it because I think the actor changes could be confusing for those dipping into my videos to see what it's all about, but I'll caveat it when I do it on that basis. Finally, I had to laugh when I heard the show had been polished and released on HBO Max after I started doing my reviews, because if you look at the introduction to the playlist, you'll see that there was nothing whatsoever about the show on the Warner Brothers website at the time when I started putting these videos together. Nothing. Now, of course, its existence is suddenly recognised. Classic timing on my part. Let me also give a shout out to Medusa Cascade's channel. She's doing traditional reaction videos to Babylon 5 as a genuine newcomer, working through it for the first time. So do check out her channel for that and other shows. I'll put some details in the description here. She didn't ask me to say any of that, so whilst it may be shooting myself in the foot, I do think it's well worth looking at her work. I'm currently just a touch ahead of her, so it'll be interesting to see how we differ. Oh, and if you're curious, the hat has been with me for a long time and is hiding my COVID hair. Think of it as my comfort animal when the real one isn't around. Stay safe and good night.